Hello, Flat Earth researchers, debaters and debunkers. We're going to have a look at the contradictions we are faced with when we are led to believe that we see or experience the effects of Coriolis or a Coriolis force if we are on a spinning globe. We'll see that it really doesn't apply to our practical reality when doing things on or above the Earth, and how it actually works fine on a stationary level plane with the sun and moon doing circuits above that plane. And we'll look at the very similar properties of air to water in that it acts very much like a fluid. So here we can see an illustration from Wikipedia as to what the Coriolis force is supposed to create on the Earth, with these arrows here representing the way winds and hurricanes will have these eddies going in different directions either side of the equator, which is said to be because we are on a spinning globe. Of course, this is the kind of image we regularly see, and we are told that these eddies of air and air currents go in different directions either side of the equator. But we can put this down to being just the natural physics of moving air currents, which are very similar to water as well. This image illustrates it very nicely, and we can see that we have these eddies which go in these different directions here, either side of the equator, with the water as well as with the air, as we see here. So this basically demonstrates that we have these very similar properties for water and air, and in the way they behave both as liquids. This is a good illustration of that. We have, you can see here, this is supposed to be, this is mud in water that gets churned up, and then we have smoke in the air as we get movement. So we have what appears to be a chimney here from maybe a train or something. As it's moving forward, then this resistance is generated, and we get this these eddies of smoke, just as we get these eddies of the mud in the water. So we can see here that in water and air we get very similar effects. Air is really very similar to water. It is very liquidy in its behavior. It's just less dense. And this also is a good example of how we see these eddies being created in the air by this aircraft. So again, we are seeing very similar effects in both water and air. Here's another illustration of this is apparently a satellite image of the sea, and it shows us how we see these eddies being very similar to what we see in air. So we see very similar behaviors in these two mediums, one just being more dense than the other. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this and look at this particular image. Now this shows us the contradiction that we are faced with if we are to believe that we are on a rotating globe, and then we take off in an aircraft from that rotating globe. If there is this Coriolis force or effect going on in the air because the Earth is rotating, then of course if you consider this ball here to be an aircraft taking off from the Earth, then if it traveled in a straight line to its destination, it shouldn't get to that destination because the Earth should have rotated away from it. It seems very simple, but this is the reality that we experience, because aircraft go from point A to point B and never have to compensate for any alleged spin of the Earth. people will argue that it's all relative, but at the end of the day, there is nothing done to compensate for any alleged spin of the Earth and the Coriolis force or effect that we should experience if we lift off from a rotating body, as we can see illustrated here. This just doesn't happen when we travel through the air above the Earth. And so that's one reason why we just don't see this happening. Also, people often refer to Foucault's pendulum as being some kind of proof that the Earth is rotating under a pendulum that is constantly swinging in the same direction. And again, if this is to believed to be the case, that we have something in the air while the Earth rotates beneath it, we do not experience that when we get into aircraft. And it should be especially true if we're going to fly through the air faster than or against this alleged spin. We should experience a difference, but we simply do not experience that in our reality. So what I'd like to do now is just show how it's perfectly feasible to perceive the Coriolis effect that we see in the atmosphere, or the rotation of air and water either side of the equator above a flat Earth. So this should be a fairly straightforward illustration to understand. What we have here is the sun doing circuits along with the moon, and we can see that as the sun, if it's a local sun, which does make sense to our senses, we can perceive it as being this way. There is no reason to think that the sun is distant and massive. It can be just as we see it, and it will go around in circuits, and as it does so, it pushes the air out of the way, and we get these eddies of air. And we can say the same about the water, just as we see here, just as we see this aircraft, which you could imagine as being the sun, going through the air, and the heat and all the disturbance and possibly electromagnetic properties of the sun will create these eddies, these vortexes in the air. So we can see it as being this way, and it does make sense in terms of real physics. So the sun would go around, and we get these eddies of air going in different directions. And the same can apply to the moon, and especially the tides, which it's undeniable that the moon and the tides on the Earth are intrinsically linked. And we could assume that the moon influences the tides. So if the moon in fact has electromagnetic properties which are present and prevalent within the air above our Earth, there's no denying that. That is another scientific fact, that we have an air on an atmosphere that is full of these electromagnetic influences. So we can hypothesize and theorize that the moon is doing circuits just like the sun on a very similar path, and as it does so, we get the same effect with these eddies of currents created in the water. Now, it's also known that salt water is affected by magnets. You can push salt water around with magnets. So if you haven't heard about this before, I recommend you just go and look for it on YouTube. You will see videos of people demonstrating that salt water can be pushed around by magnets. And of course, fresh water is not affected in the same way, and we do not get tides in fresh water. We only get tides in saline water or seawater. So again, these are things that all make sense in the realms of real, demonstrable, practical physics. If we allow ourselves to consider that the sun and the moon have electromagnetic properties, and that they are local, and that and they are circling above a level stationary plane, it makes much more sense. There is no need to do any more imaginary mental gymnastics, and we can see again that these effects are a reality. They are part of our world of natural physics. So I hope that's helped put things into perspective. Thank you very much. Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.